Good morning, Chair Vollendroff, members Garrett and Holmes, staff and guests. The lobbies are open and the recording has begun.
Thank you, Deb. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the board caucus meeting for Tuesday, April 15th. We will start our caucus meeting with a legislative update from Mark Webster. So Mark, I'll turn it over to you. You must be feeling good. I can see the finish line is near.
Exactly. Well, good morning, Chair Vollendroff and members Garrett and Holmes. We are getting very, very close here to the end of session. And thus far, things look like they're kind of lining up to allow the legislature to get out on time. The House and Senate came to an agreement on Saturday around revenue. So that final deal on new revenue to balance the budget has been agreed to. It's not public as of yet, but we'll start to get an indication pretty soon. Tomorrow's another big legislative cutoff. It's opposite House cutoff where bills have to pass the other chamber. And of course, this applies to bills that don't raise revenue and aren't necessary to implement the budget, as with all of the previous ones we've talked about. So for us, we're keeping an eye on our agency request bill, House Bill 1698, and then many of the bills that we've talked about all session, like the Outdoor Dining World Cup bill from the City of Seattle, House Bill 1515, the Cannabis Lab Accreditation Bill, House Bill 1347, Cannabis Retail Advertising, Senate Bill 5206, and then the House's Social Equity and Cannabis Bill, House Bill 1551. A lot of work on amendments on these bills, and we're trying to be helpful where we can. I think most of these will probably move eventually, although I think it's at this point not looking very good for that Cannabis Retail Advertising Bill. The latest amendment on 1515 attempts to make it revenue neutral, saying that we should set the fees on a group of permits that we would issue high enough to cover our costs to implement, which are significant. That's a very, very tricky math problem that they've given us, and I really want to thank the finance team for doing what they can on that on very, very tight timelines. It's really important that we get that right, or it would kind of be a budget cut for us potentially. There's a proposed amendment on House Bill 1698, our agency request bill, that would add costs and I think essentially neutralize its chances of passing. So we are doing what we can to ensure that that gets voted down. I'm optimistic. Some bills now have made it all the way through. I think we talked last time about our agency request bill, House Bill 1341 on the medical cannabis excise tax exemption. That's passed. It's been delivered to the governor and will be signed very, very soon. So that's exciting. Another bill that we've talked about a lot here is Senate Bill 5403 on management agreements for cannabis retailers. This is a bill I think that the cannabis industry largely supported, so it didn't pit one industry group against another. But it is still very tricky, and I anticipate it's going to be a big project for our rulemaking team. Very technical, a lot of oversight or engagement from industry. They want to make sure we get this right. And I'm glad that the bill was as specific as it was. So I think they've got a lot to work with there. So this is the bill that clarified that even through management agreements, you can't control business activities on more than 5 cannabis retail locations, even if you don't technically have ownership rights to more than 5. Now, there are a number of bills that are not subject to the cutoff that we've been following because they raise revenue. More have dropped in recent days, including a bill that would create a new higher excise tax on high THC products from Representative Davis. The omnibus tobacco bill that we're kind of calling House Bill 2068 from Representative Reeves packaged together the flavor ban that we talked about way back at the beginning of session with some pretty steep increases in tobacco taxes and a tax on synthetic nicotine. It was on the schedule in finance to move out of committee, but it's come off of that schedule, and I don't know that it's going to be moving because the fiscal note came in, and it looks like that the revenue losses due to the flavor ban may outweigh the revenue gains from the tobacco tax hikes, especially in the out years. One that we've been following closely, we've talked a lot about it here, is the bill that would increase our permit and licensing fees. As you know, the original raised them all by 50% kind of across the board. The Senate has tried to kind of go through it type by type and raise them differentially. That ends up angering one or more group of stakeholders, so it's very tricky, and I think they've gone through a couple of iterations. We might see a few more by the end of session. And then finally, of course, we're making a push on confirmations. Heard good things, I think, regarding your nomination, Chair Vollendroff, and we're going to see what we can do on that front, just making sure that it gets pulled to the floor, and then we have some momentum and can get both of them hopefully voted on before the end here. I have to say the legislature hasn't been moving quickly on gubernatorial appointments, but at some point you have to figure that they're going to have to do more than the 3 or 4 at a time that has been their pace recently. So hopefully once some of these big things are voted off, especially the revenue things, they can devote a little bit more time to those gubernatorial appointments, and then hopefully we'll see them pick up the pace. I think I'll stop there and see if there are any questions.
I have one question, Mark. If you could go back and talk, first of all, what's the bill number for Rep. Davis's bill regarding increase in taxes for high THC products?
I knew you were going to ask that. Let me just see.
I
believe it is 2075.
2075. Do you have much more detail about that you can talk about, or should I? I mean, just
we can. I mean, it's fairly simple, and you'll remember, of course, that she had a version of this in 2023. In that case, there were 3 separate tax rates depending on the THC concentration of the product. In this version, it's just 2. So that dividing line is 35% THC. So under that, it stays with the current 37% excise tax rate. Above that, the new rate would be 50%.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from board members? All right, thank you, Mark. Really appreciate the update, and keep it up. All right, next on the agenda, we have an update, a quarterly update from our Human Resources Director, Anita Bingham. Morning, Anita.
Good morning. Great to see you all. I'll let Gretchen pull up the PowerPoint if she's willing. There she is. She's fast. Moving. All right, so last December, Governor Inslee signed Executive Order 2404 with the goal of increasing hiring opportunities in Washington state government. The order includes 6 components, and Gretchen, if you could move to the next one, I think we'll see the 6. OFM State HR recently launched an online toolkit to assist agencies in meeting the requirements of the order, and I'll briefly touch on each one of those. Is it not moving, Gretchen?
I was going to say it's not moving.
No, we're on the same slide. There we go.
Okay, there we go. All right, so you can move to the next one, please. All right, so NeoGov is the online recruiting system used by state agencies. State HR noticed that the system was being used inconsistently, resulting in unreliable data. Good data from the system is necessary to help understand where people from historically marginalized communities may be experiencing barriers in the recruitment process. As of March this year, agencies are required to track each step in the NeoGov, so there will be data to show where diverse applicants are falling out of the recruitment process. The LCB was already tracking the six steps, so it was no change for us.
Good.
Yeah, next slide. Competency-based hiring is a recruitment approach that focuses on... We're
still stuck on the previous slide, just FYI.
Okay. Just doesn't want to seem to cooperate very well.
Deb, Gretchen, I'm assuming you're trying to move the slides.
Yeah, we are. There's a delay.
Okay,
Sorry.
there we go.
There we go. Thank you. All right. So competency-based hiring is a recruitment approach that focuses on evaluating candidates' skills, abilities, and behaviors to determine their fit for a specific role, rather than relying solely on credentials or experience. The executive order requires state agencies to move towards the competency-based hiring process. Senate House Bill 2216 went into effect last June and prohibits requiring college degrees as the only way to meet required qualifications unless required by law. Next slide. There are 2 upcoming deadlines. By July, we must remove certification, specific years of experience, and other bias qualifications. There is an exception for any progressive job class series, such as Administrative Assistant 1 through 5, where we can use years of experience, as noted in the state HR job class specifications. By the end of the year, we will transition fully to competency-based hiring. Next slide. I think we need one more. Oh, I think we're actually too far. We should be on, can you back it up to, there's a chart that shows different ways to gain job experience. Did we maybe move past that one?
Holly?
Are we still, or is there still any preference, or is there any preference more so if people are already in state government over a candidate coming from the outside?
No, there's no preference. It's just that they have to meet the skills and abilities and whatever requirements we determine for the position. So veterans might get some preference depending on their status, but state employees don't get any specific preference. Although I do think it's easier once you're in the system to kind of understand, you know, how the system works and that kind of thing. People get to know you and you gain kind of promotional opportunities through that. But technically,
But in saying that, do you feel like even though it's not in writing, is that creating some type of bias?
I mean, it could. I think there's bias for what we know, right? For when people work with other people, they tend to get to like them. And so I do see like internal promotions do happen because we kind of know that person's work and their personality and that kind of thing. So from that regard, I guess you could say there could be. Is that what you were thinking?
I have a quick question. I don't know. So in county government, there were times where we had positions that were posted only internally. Is that still a potential path for positions, or is it not allowable any longer to do internal postings only?
It is allowable. We occasionally do that if there's some good reason to do that. I know even like with our fiscal positions, a lot of times there will be internal promotions when, say, we have a fiscal analyst 3 that leaves and we've got a 2 that works here. If they're doing a great job, then obviously, you know, they're a strong candidate to move up. But we don't typically just post those internally. So it's kind of rare when we do. There has to be a good reason why we choose to do that.
Okay.
And Anita, where I was going with this, because I was on been on other interview panels within state government, particularly out of the governor's office and things. And one of the things that the person that's from HR that's leading clearly says to all of us to not have those type of bias, to remove those bias, and to focus strictly on the applicant. So and I think we've had this conversation probably over a year or so ago, saying that and things and coming right from HR is still encouraging, in my opinion, those type of bias of if they're already in state government. And when I sit on other interview panels within state government, they tell us to remove having any bias, whether they're internal or external.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we our recruitment teams gets with the interview panels and they send them information. We'll get to information here in a minute about anti-bias training that all people involved with the hiring process need to take before they can, be involved. So we definitely ask people to come at it with a clean perspective, to look at each candidate individually and not have any preconceived, notions about who's going to be more successful. We want it to be based on the answers that they provide during the interviews and, the reference checking and that kind of thing. So we are definitely giving that advice to come at it, in an unbiased way. I'm just saying, by nature, does that happen? It might, because people do get to know people and, based on that.
Yeah, and we all have bias. We all have, that's just human nature. And so I think it sounds like the direction is to recognize that bias and to put it aside in the decision-making process.
Yes, totally agree with that. So we're back to the chart about just some examples of, how people might gain experience to qualify for positions. It's just kind of a new way of looking at how people become qualified rather than, like I said earlier, just being strictly about credentials and their work experience. So, all right, next slide. Get back to my notes here. All right. The order states that every state employee must have an awareness of two principles. People face different obstacles to access state services, and how we choose to treat people has the power to make it easier or harder for them to be successful. By July, all job announcements must contain at least one equity-minded qualification. Also, by the end of the year, every agency will complete an equity competency assessment. Next slide. And here's the slide that talks about training. So anyone participating in any aspect of recruitment and hiring must complete anti-bias training. This begins with a 35-minute e-learning course, and then after the first year, or people can do it sooner, there's a 2.5-hour virtual instructor-led refresher class. HR is tracking to ensure all hiring supervisors and panel members have completed the training. Next slide. To achieve the goal of equal pay for same or similar work, hiring supervisors must apply a pay equity lens when making compensation offers to prospective hires. At the LCB, managers consult with the recruitment team and the appointing authority to determine the appropriate salary to offer candidates to ensure pay equity across the teams and the agency. Next slide. Last month, HR submitted our initial hiring plan to state HR. Now that S&P has successfully launched, the HR consultants will begin work with each division to update position descriptions to reflect the competencies and skills necessary for every position. In addition, we will train supervisors in interview panels and align our reference check process. Future reporting requirements will likely be included in the annual HR management report provided to state HR each fall. Next slide. The goal of the directive is to enable qualified individuals to participate in a fair competition and evaluation process, which ultimately broadens the talent pool, minimizes bias, and enhances placing the right person in the right job. And that was all for the executive order. If there's any questions on that before we move on.
Any questions? Seeing no questions, I will say that I really believe that this is the right thing to do. I think that credentials, while important for certain jobs, shouldn't be a barrier to state employment. So I really appreciate the different way of recognizing the strengths that individuals bring to the process and not just looking at academic credentials. So appreciate this work.
Yeah, it is a big step for state government, and I think it is going to be really important. So I'm happy to see it finally. It took a while for that executive order to get signed. I know that it was over in the governor's office for quite a while. I think they were working out some of the details of it, but it is in effect now, and we're working with state HR to kind of, they're developing best practices to help agencies comply, and the toolkit's been really helpful. So we'll be referring to that. They're planning to put like a phase 2 of the toolkit out there. So that will be good for us.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So next slide. So we have good news on the labor front. We have a ratified WPEA contract agreement. If funded by the legislature, employees will receive general wage increases of 3% in July this year and 2% July 2026. These job classes listed will also receive job increases. So we're pretty excited about that. This will be really nice for those folks. Next slide. For those employees covered under the coalition contract, they will also receive the 3% and 2% general wage increases. The LEOs have new job classifications and receive pay range increases and recruitment and retention incentives, again, pending funding approval. This is really a really important step in addressing our LEO vacancy rate. And I want to give a shout out to Dawn and Yoli and the HR team for all the hard work that they put into making this package successful. So a lot of back and forth with state HR to get this even moving, because they have to support it. And so on both those packages, actually, they did a lot of work. So kudos to Dawn for spearheading that. Next slide. HR has recently updated 4 policies, including policy 110, ethical conduct and outside employment. The update includes a new section addressing employee participation in external organizations that align with the agency's mission, goals, or interest. Next slide. Looking at employee hires and turnover for the first quarter, we had 10 new employees and 11 separations. And since the hiring freeze went into effect in December, each new vacancy is reviewed by Director Lucella to determine if it meets the exemption or exception criteria. So that has been the process on those as they become vacant. And I think that concludes, unless there's any questions on any of that.
I have a couple of quick questions, Anita. One is related to the hiring freeze. Is that indefinite at this point until the governor states otherwise? That's pretty much hiring freeze is in effect?
Yeah, it's indefinite until we hear differently. So.
And the other question, and I'm assuming we don't have an answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I've been asked, and that is, do we have any information on employee furloughs at this particular point?
We do not. We're still waiting for the combined budget, which I think is due at any time now. And I think that will give us an indication of kind of what they've agreed on in terms of whether or not we'll have furloughs and how many.
Okay, great. Yeah. Thank you for that update.
Sure.
All right. Seeing no further questions, I appreciate your quarterly update as usual. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Okay, our next agenda item is the LCB Advisory Council discussions. And I asked that this be on the agenda. As we've implemented some of our efficiency strategies, one of the commitments that we've made to the community is to stand up the advisory councils that we have traditionally had. And in having conversation with members of the legislature and internally, a couple of different scenarios or formats have been discussed, and I wanted to share with you my proposal of where we head in terms of the advisory councils. And I've talked with, again, members of the legislature. I've talked with internal staff. I even met with Gretchen, and I even met with Dustin, our former administrative assistant, for his history on this whole thing, just to get a broad perspective. And historically, we've had 3 advisory councils. We've had a cannabis advisory council, we've had an alcohol advisory council, and we've had a tribal council. And early on, I indicated that we would not continue with the tribal council because now we have a tribal liaison. And in recognizing the uniqueness of government to government contracting, I'm proposing that we just continue to have the work that Dr. Marla Conwell has done in terms of that relationship, so that we not bring back the Tribal Advisory Council. Early on, I had also suggested that we may and should consider an advisory council for public health and prevention. Since that time, I've actually reconsidered that, and it's largely based on feedback that I received in talking with legislators around that proposal. And I was asked whether that was our primary mission. And while I do believe, and it is in our mission statement, it feels like we have an existing structure in place, and that is the Public Health Prevention Roundtable format that seems to be working. And so my proposal is that we not stand up a 3rd advisory council, and that we move forward with just the 2 advisory councils, one for cannabis, one for alcohol. And so I wanted to stop there and see if board members had questions or comments or thoughts about what I've talked about so far, and then I'll go into kind of like the next steps.
This is, I agree that we don't need to tribal. It was the cannabis, alcohol, and tribal in the past, but you keep referring to meeting with legislators and others. When we created the advisory council, it was internal among the board members, nothing to do with any direction from legislators or anything like that. So I don't want to send the wrong message that there's something that the legislators have to, we created these internally,
Yeah, no,
between the board.
Yeah, no, thank you for that clarification. And I guess let me just clarify that in the process of implementing our board efficiencies, I have been questioned by members of the legislature about where we're headed and the decisions that we're making. And so
Okay.
I've met with several legislators just to talk about why we've made these changes and what we're hoping to achieve, and how we plan to continue to have community voice in our work. And
Okay.
so that's the process, Board Member Garrett. I totally agree that this is an
Right, that
internal.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No, I just
Any-
want to be clear on that one. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Any other comments or thoughts about so far? Okay. So given that, one of the, I'm trying to create, I'm proposing that we create a structure around how we move forward with continuing to have community voice and involvement. And so we've got the 2 advisory councils. We have 2 groups. So I've already mentioned the Prevention Public Health Roundtable. And then we also have been meeting independently with the sports and entertainment facilities. And so I'm proposing that we have 2 different structures. One is advisory councils, and the other is roundtables. And the roundtables would continue in the format that they are. That they wouldn't be like all 3 of us go to that. The advisory councils would be structured as they historically have, public meetings with all of us attending. The other ones would continue as they are, where one board member participates. Now, it just so happens that I have been the board member that's been participating in the roundtable. Well, actually, it was Chair Postman previous to his departure was doing prevention public health. When he departed, I stepped into that role. I had already been doing the sports and entertainment, and Chair Postman also used to do the tribal work, and so I've stepped into that. So just by nature of history and then stepping into those roles that Chair Postman had previously held, I hold those other seats. And I would propose that I continue to do that. I'm open to discussion if there's a board member that really has a significant interest in any one of those areas and wants to step in. I'm happy to have that conversation. I would also suggest that we hold open the opportunity for additional roundtables that come up. Should we have a particular area of interest that either a board member is interested in or a director within the LCB suggests that we should stand up, that we could do those as well. So just because we've identified these two roundtables, the public health prevention and the sports and entertainment, doesn't mean we're limited to those. And I also see the advisory councils being ongoing with no duration of time, that we would continue to do those twice a year as we historically have. And then with the roundtables, those could either be ongoing or shorter in duration, depending on what the need is. So that's kind of the structure that I'm proposing. Any questions or thoughts about that so far? All right. In terms of the who does what, I think that it makes sense to me. Board member Garrett has been doing the cannabis for a while, and just to put a structure around it, it seems like using the seniority or the tenure on the board as being kind of the driver. It makes sense that board member Garrett would continue to do cannabis. Board member Holmes, that would leave you with the alcohol, which I think is great in the sense of, you know, giving each board members an area of things to dig into, to get to know, to understand more, and structure it that way makes sense to me. So that's my proposal, and I just wanted to check in with both of you and see how you feel. When we laid out our board efficiencies, we heard early on that I think there's an interest in us standing these up sooner rather than later. And I agree with that we should probably consider standing them up sooner rather than later. Keeping in mind that we're talking about 2 meetings per year. Part of our efficiencies, I want to make sure we're not actually inadvertently adding even more meetings than we took away based on our changes. But I'll stop there and see if you've got any questions or thoughts about the proposal. Okay. I think I see a thumbs up, and we're good to go on that. So I'll work with Gretchen and we'll get that in motion and take it to the next steps. All right. Well, that concludes our agenda, other than our last item, which is board member and executive assistant reports. So anything from board members to report? Yes, board member Holmes.
Just consistent with your proposal, Mr. Chair, I'd like to be excused from next week's caucus so that I can attend a 4-hour state bar CLE on alcohol regulation, marketing, and the like.
Very good. Thank you for the notice. And yeah, that sounds great. Okay, so hearing no others, any executive assistant reports from Gretchen or Deb?
Nothing, Chair Vollendorf. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Well, that concludes our agenda for today. I appreciate everybody's participation, and we'll see you soon.